Cannabis Oversight Committee meeting. Welcoming OOC, all my fellow committee members and the public. I'm going to speak fast because we have a lot to go through. It's a pretty ambitious agenda. So just want to remind everyone, we will take public comment from members of the public. Please note that you will have the opportunity to provide your comments. They will go on record. You have 2 minutes to do so. It would be great if we can just stick.
I can't hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Sean, and
Ali,
we
I
can hear
can't
Ali.
hear you.
Can everybody hear me?
Sean, can you hear me? I think Sean is having difficulty hearing on his end.
I can't hear you, Marissa. I
Okay,
don't know what's going on with this phone, man.
you might have to call back in, Sean. Nikesh, is there a way to send a message to Sean?
So what we'll do is we'll work with Sean to get him back. The only issue is that Sean is the 5th member to meet quorum, so we'll have to wait until he returns to
Log out and log back
officially
in.
begin the meeting.
He's still online. I think it's just that we need to figure out his audio.
Right. So if you give us one moment, Chair Jamali, feel free to give the instructions about public comment and whatnot. And in that meantime, we will work with Sean to hopefully resolve his audio issue.
Thank you, Nikesh. Again, for general comments, please reserve your comments until the general comment section of each item. You'll have an opportunity to provide a general comment at the very end of the meeting. We have several big agenda items, so we're going to try to keep it pretty focused and streamlined. Please note that the committee members are not permitted to answer your comments. And that being said, we'll turn around to our housekeeping items with roll call as soon as Sean is back online. If the OOC wants to make any opening remarks, since we're waiting, this would be the time to do so.
Is this the time for a speech?
Yes, Marissa.
Thank you. Thanks for the floor. Very happy to be here and excited for this packed agenda. We have a lot of items that I know that the community is eager to chat about, so happy to create a space here to discuss them. We'll have some updates too, especially around grants. We'll be quick about that and some other items that I know folks are interested in. So, but quorum is super important for today's discussion, so we're gonna work offline here to assist Sean and make sure that he can get on swiftly and can hear us and participate in the conversation.
Thank you, Marissa. And that being said, I do want to point out that some of these agenda items we've already been working on for quite a while, and we've have a final iteration of a lot of these items, and hopefully that will save us some time and reserve some time for the agenda item that's probably the most on the public's mind, and that it's important to realize we're here to justify and make our process and our program better, and not create any kind of programs that would undermine what we're trying to achieve. It's only been 2 years, so let's try to dial in legislation before we try to come up with new things that haven't been tried or true yet. So that being said, I think Sean is ready. Is that right, Nikesh?
Chair Jamalian, I wish I could say he was. We were still working through it, and right now he has dropped off the call. Ray is in the process of bringing him back on. What we have decided, so the meeting can continue because of the heavy items that are on the agenda, we will have him stay on the call, and we will try and resolve the audio issues while he is here, so we meet quorum so the committee can continue. So as soon as he's back on, we will have quorum proceed, and we'll work behind the scenes to try and get his audio resolved.
Great, thanks, Nikesh. Anybody else want to kill some airtime?
And with that, it looks like Sean is back on. Sean, can you hear us? Okay, well, we will continue working to resolve the audio issue. Feel free to begin the meeting, Chair Jamalian.
Then we'll start with item number 1, since Sean is digitally present. Can we get roll call done?
So roll call for the August 25th Cannabis Oversight Committee, starting by non-voting seats. Seat number 1, Department of Public Health, Mohamed Mali.
Present.
Seat number 2, Police Department, Captain Brian Philpott, Sergeant Chris Oshita, or yeah, that's it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Ray.
Seat number 3, Department of Building Inspection, Jeff Buckley. Seat, or Patrick O'Riordan. Seat number 4, the Planning Department, Michael Christensen. Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Present.
Seat number 5, San Francisco Unified School District, Corey Pack. Rosalia Lopez. Seat number
Present.
6, present. Which member was that from San Francisco Unified?
Corey Pock.
Thank you. Seat number 6, Entertainment Commission, Maggie Whalen, Caitlin Azevedo, or Dylan Rice.
Dylan Rice, present.
And seat number 7, the Fire Department, Lieutenant Nick Figari.
Present.
Moving on to voting members, seat number 8, Ali Jamalian.
Present.
Seat number 9, Aaron Flynn. Seat number 10 is currently vacant. Seat number 11, Doug Block.
Present.
Oh, no.
Seat number 12, Sean Richard.
Present.
Good or what?
Seat number 13, Nina Parks.
Present.
Seat number 14, Brendan Hallidan.
I am present.
Seat number 15, Teresa Foglio Ramirez. Seat number 16, Sarah Payan. Okay, so we have roll call of 5 members, voting members present and 5 non-voting members present.
Thank you, John. Moving on to a review and consideration of our agenda. I will have the committee members take a minute to review these, and then we can open up to public comment. So I would just give everyone a couple of minutes to review. I'm sure you've all had enough time in the last 15 minutes to look at it, so we could open up for public comment fairly quickly.
I only had one thing. Do I need to request
Go ahead.
comment through the chair? I'd heard Director Rodriguez mention it briefly, but I just wanted to request that we add on just a quick update about the grants. I was thinking maybe to item number 4, if OOC is going to be presenting in that item.
Yeah, we will be. We'll do an update during, I think it's the update section. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to open up for public comment.
Thank you, Chair Jamalian. Members of the general public who wants to provide public comment on this particular agenda item can do so by submitting your written comment through the chat function, or you can dial 1-415-655-0001 and then input the access code, which is 146-708-4595, and press *3 when prompted to do so. You will be unmuted when it's your turn to speak, and each individual will have 2 minutes to provide your comment. Chair Jamalian, I'm going to check the check function now. See none, and I'm going to check the participant list to see if there's anyone waiting in the queue to speak. See none. Chair Jamalian.
Thank you. So then item 2 would be closed. Is that correct, Ray? Nobody's waiting to speak.
That is correct, Chair.
Great.
Chair
Okay.
Jamalian, just as a matter of process, because there was the recommendation that an update regarding the distribution of the grants, redistribution of the grants be added to the agenda, that would need to be there would need to be a motion followed by a vote, and then it would be incorporated into today's agenda. So before you close, if that's something you'd like to see reflected in today's agenda, you would need to have a motion and then a vote.
Understood. I thought that was part of the update. Then I would probably ask the committee members to make a motion if they want the update on the redistribution.
I'll make the motion since I brought it up. I'd like to make a motion to request a brief update on the redistribution of the grants and an update on the technical assistant contract from the Office of Cannabis.
Thank you. Motion's on the floor. Anybody second that?
I second it.
Thank you, Member Parks. Can we get a vote on the motion, please?
He's muted.
My apologies. So all those in favor of the motion to update the agenda with the grant redistribution and technical assistance updates? Ali Jamalian,
Aye.
Doug Block,
Aye.
Sean Richard,
Aye.
Nina Parks,
Aye.
Brendan Hallinan.
Aye.
Motion carries with 5 ayes, unanimously, 5 ayes, 0 nays, 0 abstentions.
Thank you, John. So that item will be, that update will be added to the agenda. In that case, I'd like to move on to agenda item number 3, reviewing and approving the minutes from our last meeting. This might just take a minute. This is what I was referring to earlier. All of our recommendations, some of those are in there. They've already been wordsmithed. They're pretty detailed. If we can get those signed off, because that will come back up later in our recommendation portion, and it would probably save us some time at a later agenda item. So take your time to review them, and please, any comments that you have to make that you want to discuss those, and then take public comment for the item.
When my fellow board members are ready, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Doug.
I do have one issue. It's just an inconsistency on recommendation number 2. It says 15% shelf space, and I believe on the recommendations we have it says 10% shelf space. I'm not sure what was correct, but I think there's an inconsistency there.
I actually read that the same way, but Emma was kind enough to clarify it for me. In our minutes of the last meeting, they differ from the actual recommendation that we came up with, I believe. because we did that later. But Emma, do you mind jumping in here?
Yeah, no problem. So, let's see. So I believe that you're looking at the recommendations from November 18th, 2020. That recommendation said 10%, but the July 14, so let me, that says 15% because the committee did vote on 15%. Let me just get which item number so you can quickly grab it. So it's called item number 7. That's November 18, 2020. And then item 3, that's the minutes that you're approving right now. That percent.
Okay, great.
July 14th minutes actually reflect accurately 15% on recommendation number 2 under point 5 of item 3. Do we have a second on Doug's motion then?
Chair Jamalian, before you can put it to a vote, public comment first.
Sorry, yeah. So can we take public comment, please?
Sure thing. Chair Jamali. Members of the general public, again, who want to provide public comment on this particular agenda item can do so by submitting your written comment through the chat function, or you can dial 1-415-655-0001. Input the access code, which is 146-708-4595, and press *3 when prompted to do so. You will be unmuted when it's your turn to speak, and each individual will have 2 minutes to provide your public comment. Chair Jamali, I'm going to check the chat function now. See none, and I'm going to check the attendee list. Chair Jamali, I don't see anyone waiting in the queue to speak.
Thank you, Ray. Then we can take motion to approve the minutes as is. Do we have a second?
Second.
John, could you take the vote, please?
Motion to approve the minutes. Ali Jamalian.
Aye.
Chair 11, Doug Block.
Aye.
Sorry, seat 12, Sean Richard.
Aye.
Seat 13, Nina Parks.
Aye.
Seat 14, Brendan Hallinan.
Aye.
Motion carries with 5 yeas and 3 members absent, 1 vacant.
Thank you, John. Moving on to item number 4. I will now hand it over to the Office of Cannabis. As everyone knows, we're missing and we have an open seat. And I would just hand it over to Marissa and the OOC to give us a brief update on next steps and what will happen to fill the seat.
Thank you, Chair Jamali. Before Director Rodriguez speaks, I'm going to provide a brief update on the vacancy on this body. In July, former Vice Chair Jessica Cry resigned from her position on the committee due to personal reasons. Therefore, her seat, which is seat 10 on the committee, becomes vacant. After that, the clerk of the Board of Supervisors is aware of this vacancy and is in the process of posting the vacancy notice to open the appointment process for this seat. Former members of Cry's seat, again, which is seat 10 on the committee, must be held by a representative of organized labor who works with the cannabis business labor force. Individuals who are interested in applying should contact the clerks of the Board of Supervisors for additional information. Once a sufficient number of applications are received by the clerk's office, the next step will be a hearing at the Rules Committee to move forward with the selection process, and our office will provide updates when they are available. On the other hand, our office also wants to share a recognition from Supervisor Chan's office, and I will pass it to Director Rodriguez to share the details of this recognition. Director
Thank you,
Rodriguez.
Ray. Thank you, everyone. We just wanted to take this opportunity to acknowledge and thank the contributions of both Jessica Cry and Nina Parks. as they did serve this organization in leadership capacity during our first iteration of this board. So unfortunately, Jessica Cry can't be with us today, but there is a certificate of honor that will be sent to her, thanking her for her service in recognition of your contributions to the City and County of San Francisco, for your service as Vice Chair of the Cannabis Oversight Committee, as a voice for workers in the cannabis industry, and the Board of Supervisors of the City and County of San Francisco does hereby extend this highest honor, and signed by them. So that will be going to Ms. Pry to thank her. And then in addition, one for Ms. Parks, between bites. This says, in recognition of your contributions to the City and County of San Francisco for your service as Chair of the Cannabis Oversight Committee and contributions to the cannabis industry and equity community, the Board of Supervisors of the City and County of San Francisco does hereby extend its highest honor, again sung by the Board of Supervisors, and this will be mailed to you as well. And so we just wanted to recognize you and thank you. And perhaps, Nina, if you'd like to say a few words, the floor is yours.
I am extremely honored, and is a really, really wonderful surprise and morale boost. So thank you so much for that recognition. This has, as you know, not been a light lift. We are creating something that has never been created before in San Francisco, as well as setting a precedent for how cannabis social equity is being addressed all across the country. So I'm very honored to have had a seat at the table, and I am honored to continue to serve and continue to build and iterate as we move forward. So thank you for the recognition, and I am so pleased that I can continue to do work with you all.
Thank you, Nina. We appreciate it. We're really happy that you're still here with us and continuing the work and moving it forward. So continuing with the important momentum. So with that, thank you all. And I think this will be the time we transition for an update on our grants program. Nikesh, Jeremy.
Thank you, Director Rodriguez. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Jeremy Schwartz, Associate Director, Office of Cannabis. As discussed in our last Oversight Committee meeting, the OOC is endeavoring towards issuing additional grant guidance towards the end of this month, no later than early September. Rest assured, the community has not missed communications to date. It is forthcoming. What folks can expect is a bulletin outlining program parameters, an award letter asking for intent to move forward with an award, and subsequently a grant contract to be signed by the grantee and the City and County of San Francisco. With regards to technical assistance providers, the TA contract expires at the end of this month. However, there will continue to be TA opportunities after the end of this month, including legal assistance with the Bar Association of San Francisco Cannabis Law Committee. We appreciate their partnership. In addition to the Kuman Group, who is contracted by the Office of Economic Workforce Development, OEWD, to provide permit compliance support in addition to legal services. These resources are free to our verified equity applicants, which is growing to almost 400 by now. So those are the updates. Grant guidance will be circulated over the next several weeks. TA opportunities will continue to exist for the community. And that concludes my update. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jeremy. And just to add on to that, if you haven't signed up for our distribution emails, please do so by visiting our website. We don't want you to miss our communications. If you are a verified equity applicant, or if you have an application in our system, you should be receiving these emails on a weekly basis. Please look out for them. Please read them. There's a lot of important information in all of them. If you aren't receiving them, please reach out to our office. Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa. Thank you, OOC. Then I will open up this agenda item for public comment, please, Ray.
Thank you, Chair Jamalian. Members of the general public who want to provide public comment on this particular agenda item can do so by submitting your written comment through the chat function, or you can dial 1-415-655-0001, input the access code, which is 146-708-4595, and then press *3 when prompted to do so. You will be unmuted when it's your turn to speak, and each individual will have 2 minutes to provide your public comment. Chair Jamalian, I'm going to check the chat function now.
Thank you, Ray.
See none, and I'm going to check the attendee list. Chair Jamalian, I see no individual waiting to speak. That concludes our public comment section for this item.
Thank you, Ray. Moving on to item number 5, something that we've been kind of kicking the can down the road for a minute, so I'd like to conclude this one as well. I think in our last meeting, there was actually pretty interesting public comment regarding some subcommittees, so that's something I want to touch upon. At this point, I'd like to invite my fellow committee members to discuss, or if they want to review them. I think we've all had a few weeks to review, so I assume that'll be a pretty short phase, but let's discuss our bylaws and if there's any changes that we feel that we want to make to them.
And Chair Jamalian, this is Nikesh. If it's helpful, we can also have John from RDA share his screen with the bylaws if a visual representation would be helpful.
That would be fantastic.
Great. Ray, would you mind passing the ball to John? And John, if you could take a few minutes just to pull up the bylaws so everyone can see your screen, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Sure thing, Nikesh.
I do have a comment, Jamalian, when you're ready.
Yeah, go ahead. Open discussion. Go for it.
Okay, yeah, I do hate to delay the approval of these bylaws because I know we've been working on it for a while. But I think you pointed out earlier there was a suggestion that was made through public comment during our last meeting by Charlie Pappas, who's a very experienced and thoughtful cannabis advocate. And the suggestion was to authorize the oversight committee through the bylaws or the chair to create subcommittees potentially to address certain issues. I mean, I think it's clear we all have limited time here, or we have limited time and large agendas. And I thought the idea of creating subcommittees kind of in preparation, which would allow us to come to these meetings with a report in place and a recommendation on certain issues, I thought would make it a lot more efficient and more productive. So I would like to make a motion. I don't know if it's the appropriate time right now or not, but before we close this issue out, make a motion to include language in the bylaws that would authorize the chair of the oversight committee through the committee, through a vote, a majority vote of the committee members, to create one or more subcommittees on special items to authorize to do reports and recommendations on special items and bring them before the full committee.
And I feel to an extent we're already doing that. We have part of our committee members are very strong and very well set up in advocacy and compassionate care. Some of the committee members are more versed in land use and permitting. Others are operational people. So I feel like we tried that in our last session and didn't really have the structure to do it. But I would really like to hear from, especially from fellow committee members who probably are on other subcommittees already, if that would increase the efficiency and also, streamline these recommendations. So please, everybody chime in.
Yeah, so a question that I would have, one, I think having subcommittees is a good idea, and having some kind of structure for subcommittees are a good idea. However, if there is interest of like 3 or more people or whatever, Ray or Nikesh can have some clarity on it that would effectively make it so like those meetings are almost like a committee quorum, you know what I mean? Like
the Brown Act violation. Yeah, that's probably.
How do we decide who goes onto the committees is a question that I would have,
I believe McClellan was saying it would be by majority vote, correct?
I mean, that's what I would propose, and I think the chair ultimately, the chair would be authorized to set the committees, at least as I would suppose.
Chair Jamali, and this is Nikesh, just to provide a little bit of context here that may be helpful. On the issue of subcommittees, there is a distinction between a subcommittee and a subcommittee meeting. What we have advised former Chair Parks in the past is that the resources for meetings are limited, as we've all talked about. So a subcommittee meeting may be a little bit more challenging and maybe the type of thing that you could authorize, but would have to happen through the arrangement of the committee itself without the additional supportive resources. So that's on the note of a subcommittee. In terms of a subcommittee meeting outside of a scheduled meeting like this one, that's an area where we would provide additional clarification. I'd like to look at the Brown Act to make sure that we are doing so in compliance. I know that our city attorney is here. And so, Sarah, if you have any information that may be helpful right now, then it's a great opportunity to speak to this issue. If not, then we can also schedule a meeting outside of this meeting with you, Chair Jamalian, to sort of explain what this process would look like, how it might be more limited, and the way to do it in compliance with all regulations. So I know that we are crunched on time, but I wanted to provide that context to help the committee make a decision one way or the other for now.
Thank you.
Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, I was just gonna speak to the subcommittee question. I know that the committee could vote. You certainly could vote by majority vote of the committee to create a subcommittee, and that might be the cleanest way to do it. But you'd need to notice that for a future committee meeting. And then on the question of whether the chair of the committee could create a subcommittee on your own, I need to look into that. I know you could do it by majority vote. I'm not sure about the second option, but I can check.
Sarah,
I don't even think that we really have to necessarily look into the second option if it creates if you even think it creates a conflict, but a majority vote would be great. It's really just in the spirit to have people with their core competences work on specific recommendations just to get them out quicker. And Sarah are much more suitable to do a compassionate care legislation than I am. Sean and I are probably better at building and pulling permits that we had to do. So it's just really, I think, in the spirit for the whole committee. So majority vote, I don't think anyone would have any issues with that.
And Sarah, I had a clarifying question that might help the committee. If a subcommittee is formed and it's constituted of 2 or 3 members, and the spirit of this subcommittee is to prepare and sort of streamline the process by which information is presented to the committee for vote, how would that group of 3 as a subcommittee be able to work outside of a scheduled meeting like this one, and it still be in compliance with Brown Act regulations? Or would they have to schedule that meeting as well?
They would have to schedule that meeting compliant with the Brown Act notice requirements. So the subcommittee, I believe, would also be a policy body that would be subject to the Brown Act, and would need to notice that meeting as well.
Okay, so thank you, Sarah. Chair Jamali, I think to the extent that that's relevant, even if a subcommittee is formed, for that subcommittee to be able to work, they would have to schedule, it would have to be a publicly noticed meeting, much like this one.
Understood. And I will defer to Member Halnan on this one because he really knows the legal framework better. So yeah, I would just kind of pass the ball back to Brendan and see what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I think it makes us more efficient, but at the same time, I don't want to create more inefficiency by having to organize a bunch more public meetings that create a lot more work for the Office of Cannabis and everybody and become counterproductive. So I would suggest that we maybe amend the bylaws to authorize it, but we don't necessarily do it till we know these answers. Or I guess we're not going to vote on it today, right? With the amendment because it's not written yet. We defer it to next meeting. Maybe we should do that, defer it to next meeting and discuss with the city attorney further.
And we've done it 3 times. We can do it one more time. It's not going to, I don't know how the rest of the committee feels about it, but yeah, Nina, how do you feel about this? Sean, how do you feel about this? Should we defer this to the table, this item for the next meeting?
I mean, I think we can make a motion to approve that, like, we have the that, you know, like, the chair would have the ability to make subcommittees, but like Helen Ann was saying, it's not something that we have to carry out right away, but at least we can move on.
Pending on compliance with the city attorney. If everyone is good with that, then we can open up for public comment and
Yeah.
and move on to the next item.
I support that.
So could we open up for public comment, Ray?
And Ray, just before you introduce the instructions for public comment, given that, John, you're already sharing your screen, would you mind sharing the front page of the agenda, which has a visual representation of how people can participate in public comment, just so it may be a little bit easier to digest? Thank you.
Thank you, John. Members of the general public who wants to provide public comment on this agenda item can do so by submitting your written comment through the chat function, or you can dial 1-415-655-0001, input the access code, which is 146708 4595, and press *3 when prompted to do so. You will be unmuted when it's your turn to speak, and each individual will have 2 minutes to provide your public comment. Chair Jamalian, I'm going to check the chat function now. See none.
Thank you, Ray.
And I'm going to check the attendee list. Chair Jamalian, I don't see anyone waiting to speak. That concludes this item, if you approve it.
I think there were some motions to be made if I am not wrong. So I would defer to my committee members if you want to make a motion regarding the subcommittees.
Want to make a motion to include in the bylaws the authorization of the Oversight Committee by majority vote to create subcommittees and approve the bylaws thereafter.
I second it.
Thank you. John, can we take a vote on the motion, please?
Yes. All those in favor of the addition to the bylaws of giving the committee the authority to create subcommittees by a majority vote? Seat number 8, Ali Jamalian.
Aye.
Seat 11, Doug Block.
Aye.
Seat 12, Sean Richard.
Aye.
Seat 13, Enid Parks.
Aye.
Seat 14, Brendan Hallinan.
Aye.
Motion carries with 5 ayes, 3 members absent, and 1 vacancy.
Thank you, John. Motion carries. Moving on, closing item number 5 and moving on to item number 6, which I believe is today's headliner. So the discussion is regarding accessory use cannabis retail permit types. I'm not sure if we should take public comment first, because I feel like that is something that the entire community is very, very fond on. And that will probably take up a little more of our discussion time today. So I think it would make most sense to take public comment and then do our discussion. Is that in line with our is that compliant, Nikesh?
Quick note, so the OOC and the planning department has a presentation to provide context around this discussion. The chair, you have the right to either go straight into public comment or ask the OOC and the planning department to provide a presentation first, then go into public comment, whichever you prefer.
No, I think you guys should do your presentation first. I just think that before we start our discussion amongst the committee members, we need to hear our community's voices first.
That sounds perfectly right.
Okay, in that case, I will give you guys the floor to the planning department and or OOC, whichever order you prefer for your presentations.
And before we get started, are all members able to hear, all voting members? Do we still have Sean on the call?
I can hear.
You can hear Sean Richards. Are you still on the call?
Yes, I'm still here. I'm here. I'm listening.
Okay, thank you. And we have Doug, so we have quorum. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Rodriguez. In the interest of time, I, as well as Michael Christensen from the Planning Department, will go through this presentation fairly swiftly. We will leave the slides up if there are subsequent questions. As Chair Jamalian already mentioned, today's presentation is regarding the issue of an accessory use cannabis retail permit. So with that, next slide, please. Thank you. Today's agenda is relatively simple. The conversation will be more extended. The agenda for today is one, to give some context around why this conversation is being had, what the circumstances are that have triggered this conversation around an accessory use cannabis retail permit type. Once we've established that groundwork, then Michael Christensen from the Planning Department, who's also a non-voting member of this committee, will provide the legal parameters of what an accessory use permit type is as of now, according to the planning code. And then we'll wrap this presentation up with a set of factors for the committee and the public to consider as a part of its discussion, and tail off with some facilitation questions that may give structure to the discussion that will follow. Next slide. As many of you may be wondering, why are we having this conversation around an accessory use permit type? And the short of it is that there was a determination, a letter of determination by the zoning administrator in response to a request relating to a project that has set the stage for this conversation. In short, the letter of determination issued that for the project to continue, the project sponsors will have to obtain an accessory use cannabis retail permit to proceed with their current project. The OOC and the Planning Department will not go into the specifics of that project here because it's still a live project. And the issue at hand is this topic of accessory use and what that might look like. As a part of the letter of determination issued by the zoning administrator, it found that the 600-foot buffer rule per Planning Code section 202.2 does not apply to an accessory use permit as the Planning Code currently stands. Now, this determination gives rise to the novel question of what is an accessory use cannabis retail permit type? Because, and this is important, this permit type does not presently exist. For it to exist, it would have to be created and legislated by the Board of Supervisors. Again, another important point to note here is that this legislation will not be created by the Office of Cannabis. The Office of Cannabis does not make legislation. Our role is to enforce the permit types and the requirements as they're written in Article 16. Accordingly, we'll enforce whatever the legislation is that gives rise to, if legislation is created, to an accessory use cannabis retail permit type, which would be drafted by the Board of Supervisors. Today's discussion is to give the committee and the community an opportunity to inform the creation or the conversation around the creation of this permit type if it is ultimately legislated by a supervisor or supervisors. We understand that opinions on this topic will vary significantly. Some of you may be opposed to the creation of this permit type altogether. Some of you may be in full support. Some of you may be in support but have strong opinions as to what the permit will allow the holder to do and not do. Today's discussion is to make way for these positions, giving everyone an opportunity to discuss the impact that such a permit type might have on the industry if it is ultimately created. So with that, I will pass along the next part of the presentation to Michael Christensen from the Planning Department to describe the legal parameters of what an accessory use permit type is right now and how it relates to this conversation.
Sure, I'm Michael Christensen, Senior Planner with the Planning Department. So an accessory use permit type for cannabis retail is not actually something that I can talk about because it doesn't exist. Like Nikesh mentioned, for any project to be considered accessory use as cannabis retail will require some pretty substantive legislation at the Board of Supervisors. But I can talk about the general concept of accessory use. Accessory use is an incredibly common thing. It's not a new concept for the planning department, but it gets into how we regulate properties. The planning department regulates the physical layout of properties and buildings, and we also regulate the way that properties are used. So accessory use means you have a principal use. It's the main thing you're doing at the site. And then a related accessory use is a related minor use that is either necessary to the operation or enjoyment of a lawful principal or conditional use, or appropriate incidental or subordinate to any such use, located on the same lot. And then there's a lot of planning code sections that govern them depending on where in the city your property is. So some key things is an accessory use can't be more than 1/3 of the total floor area of the main use. It has to be actually related to the main use. It has to be very subordinate and incidental. And interestingly, our code actually already has a provision that talks about cannabis retail as an accessory use. So planning code section 204.3 already includes a provision that does allow cannabis retail as an accessory use, but again, only if the establishment holds a permit from the Office of Cannabis specifically permitting the cannabis retail activity as accessory and accessory to other licensed activities on the same premise. And that doesn't exist. So right now it's kind of something where for accessory use cannabis retail to happen, it needs to exist in our code and the Office of Cannabis's code. Right now it kind of exists in our code, but it does not exist in theirs. So next slide. So the planning department has to actually determine that this other activity that you're doing that's accessory is actually accessory. It's not something that you can just claim. You have to actually kind of prove it to us. There's a lot of examples already in our code that have existing language. So some examples, just so people can kind of wrap their head around what this means, is if you're a restaurant and you're serving alcohol, that doesn't automatically make you a bar. You're still a restaurant, you just happen to serve alcohol. If you have a warehouse in a PDR district where office is not permitted, and you're doing, say, a cultivation site or a warehouse, and you have a little office in the back area that's managing the cultivation or the warehousing, that's not a separate office use. You're just a cultivator or a warehouse, and that office is accessory. A key example for cannabis retailers is if you have a cannabis retailer in a neighborhood commercial district, we can't authorize a parcel delivery service use, a delivery sale business in that space. If you wanted to come to us and say, I just want to do delivery out of the space, we can't approve that. But if you have a cannabis retailer, you can do limited deliveries from there because it's an accessory use. So accessory uses are not subject to the same requirements as principal uses. If you have an accessory use, we're not looking at the zoning table and making sure that it's allowed as a principal use because it's not a principal use. Whenever we have cases where it is unclear if something meets the definition and intent of an accessory use, such as for cannabis retail, we often require that an applicant obtain a letter of determination from the zoning administrator. A letter of determination is the zoning administrator reading the facts of a certain case and our code and determining whether making a determination or answering a question, particularly if something is unclear. So the project that we're kind of referencing back to today had submitted a letter of determination, submitted a lot of information on their proposed operation, all the things they want to do at the site, and really needed to substantiate that what they're doing is accessory. So with that, I'll turn it back, but if the committee or public have questions on accessory uses, I'm happy to clarify further.
Thank you, Michael. And next slide, please.
I have a quick question, Michael. So it's Brendan.
Sure.
I believe it's I'm just going to ask you for clarification, but what are the limitations in the code on accessory use? I know there's a square footage limitation. Is there any other limitations or caps on that amount of use?
So
for
it's
accessory use?
It's 1/3 of the total floor area. And then it also needs to meet the definition of accessory use, which is where it needs to be subordinate to the principal activity, actually related to the principal activity. So the 1/3 rule is quantitative. It's pretty easy to calculate that. The definition is subjective, and that's where you need a determination that we have to determine that you actually meet the definition.
Okay, because I know you brought up what made me think that was you brought up the example of a restaurant and a bar, but I think like for liquor licenses, there has to be a certain amount of liquor, a certain amount of the sales have to be food sales versus beverage sales. I was wondering if there's anything like that, but you're saying it's just subjective. You guys would look at it on a case-by-case basis.
It depends on the use. So there's a lot of accessory uses that we have specific limits built into our code. So for restaurants, if you want to be a restaurant and not a bar, you have to get more than 50% of your sales from food. Another one is parking. If you have an apartment building with parking, the parking is accessory. But if you're renting it out to the public, or if you've got hundreds of spaces and it's beyond a certain amount, it's no longer accessory. There isn't a limit in that way for cannabis retail yet, only because this isn't something that can exist currently.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I have a question as well, because earlier in the presentation, it said that the zoning administrator determined that the 600-foot buffer rule doesn't apply, while you said accessory use is pretty common, and the recommendation that planning did previously was for the Office of Cannabis to fit it into their permitting system. So how can the 600-foot buffer rule not apply if it's supposed to fit into their permitting structure? Wouldn't the
So to be clear, first off, accessory uses are never subject to the same requirements as principal uses, just like how offices are not allowed in PDR districts, but you can have them as accessory use. Cannabis retail as an accessory use would not be subject to our code requirements for principally permitted cannabis retail. But to be clear, we did not recommend that the Office of Cannabis create a permit type for this. Our letter was a determination that this activity has a pathway under our code, but does not have a pathway under the Office of Cannabis's code. So if we wanted the project to proceed, it would need legislation and they would need to create a permit for that. But that's not an endorsement of the project by the planning department.
Thank you. That's exactly the clarification I was looking for. I appreciate it, Michael.
Sure.
And Michael, before I continue with the presentation, this may help answer or address Member Hallinan's question. Are there any provisions that would regulate when the business that's using the accessory use would be able to operate? So its hours of operations, whether it would be able to operate as an independent business, or would it have to operate as a business related to the principal use? Can you speak a little bit to some of the requirements around those two considerations?
Yeah, so for anything to operate as an accessory use, it has to be an integral part of the main business. It can't be a separate thing. So if you had a cannabis retail accessory use that then the main thing that it's part of stopped operating, then the cannabis retail also needs to stop operating, whether that's permanently stop operating, or say if the main business closes, the business closes at 9 p.m., the retail component couldn't then stay open till 10. It would need to cease operation. It also can't be marketed separately or signed separately. The business needs to be portrayed as the principal use, the actual business. And this is just kind of a subcomponent of it. So it's limiting. And that's why another reason why we need a letter of determination to determine that it's actually meeting that definition.
Thank you, Michael. That's very helpful. And speaking of the letter of determination, I think another point that's helpful to elucidate here is someone who is interested in applying is looking at let's say an accessory use permit type is ultimately created. If someone is looking at Article 16 and looking at the different types of permits that they may be able to apply for, that applicant will be able to apply for an accessory use permit on its own, because the accessory use is with respect to the principal use. So can you just speak to, can you provide some clarifying remarks there around when an accessory use even comes into play? It's not the type of permit that someone could independently apply for without having some sort of principal use, getting a letter of determination, and then if the zoning administrator identified that there was an accessory use, then they could proceed with that permit type. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. I mean, I think the big question that we have is this is a concept that has somebody's come up with, and it requires a lot of legislation, and our requirements for it are going to be very different when this goes through the legislative process. But you need to really define what your principal use is, and then substantiate to that this retail activity is a subcomponent of that. It's not that you need to start with the principal use, and then you can add the retail. You can't really kind of want to do retail and then try to find some principal use that fits with it. Otherwise, it's probably not going to meet that definition. We do anticipate that there will be some other permit requirement for this. It's very possible for that to be built into our code as well as this goes through legislation. And another point is the planning department does retain discretion over all.
Oh, you just muted.
And Michael, if you're having audio difficulties, I can finish that sentence because I think you were reading what was on the slide. Are you able to speak? Okay, so it looks like Michael may be having some technical difficulty, but I believe what he was saying is that planning retains the discretion over all permits and will not approve an operation that does not meet the technical requirements and the intent of accessory use. So it's just important to identify that even if this permit type is created, there's a letter of determination that would have to determine that there is an accessory use, and that determination is at the discretion of planning. So while we wait for Michael to get back, we'll continue with the presentation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here are just some factors to consider. At this point, some of this information is repetitive of what you've already heard, so I'll gloss through it. But the short of it is that based on the factors that Michael just described in the conversation that we had with the question and answer, the accessory use cannabis retail permit is not the same as a cannabis storefront retail permit. There are limitations. And part of the conversation here is to discuss what that will look like. So one of the big factors that we believe it makes sense for this committee and the community to bring up is what is the scope of permitted activity under an accessory use as it relates to some of the other permit types. Next slide. And then here are another set of factors to consider, and this relates to the conversation around scope. What should this permit type allow to be sold? Are these only products produced on site? Are these only products using the company's brand, prohibiting external products? Is it only white labeled products? And for those who may be unfamiliar with that concept, white labeling is when a product or service removes its brand and logo from the product and instead uses the branding requested by the purchaser. Is it only equity products that can be sold under this permit type? So all products available at a dispensary with a storefront retail permit that may be sold under the accessory use cannabis retail permit type. These are some of the factors to consider. We can come back to this slide a little later, but we'll keep moving along. Next slide. And these are ultimately the general questions for the committee and the community to consider. It boils down to, if this accessory use retail permit type is legislated and created, what should it look like? Bearing in mind the factors that Michael Christensen has raised, as well as that I've discussed that are worth considering. And then also, what role should equity play in the creation of such a permit type? So with that, we will pass this part of the conversation back to you, Chair Jamalian. If you have any questions, we're happy to take them.
I'm first going to defer to all my fellow committee members. I think there probably is quite a few questions. I'm still taking some notes on the presentation. If any fellow committee member has some points they want to address before we open up for public comment, or if you guys feel like we should just open up for public comment and then have our subsequent discussion, I'm fine either way.
I think we should, I mean, unless someone has some specific on this, I mean, our conversation, I think we all probably have something to say on this. So if you want to go to public comment, I would support doing that and then coming back and having the committee members follow up in the cache with questions and comments
Totally.
after we hear from the community.
Yeah.
I agree with member Hallinan.
Yeah, so can we please open up for public comment, Ray?
Sure. Members of the general public who want to provide public comment on this particular agenda item can do so by submitting your written comment through the chat function, or you can dial 1-415-655-0001, input the access code, which is 146-708-4595, and then press *3 when prompted to do so. You will be unmuted when it's your turn to speak, and each individual will have 2 minutes to provide your comment. Chair Jamalian, I'm going to check the chat function now.
Ray, just before you do, would you mind sharing the ball with John so he can display the instructions for joining, just in case people
Sure thing.
missed? Thank you.
All yours, John. Chair Jamalian, I do see one written comment submitted to the chat box, and the comment reads, actually it's a question. Please share phone operations again. Thank you. And to this member from the general public, the phone number and the dial-in information is on the screen now. So that answers your question. And Chair Jamalian, I'm going to check the attendee list now.
Thank you, Ray. Because I'm pretty sure we will have a lot of public comment for this. If there's none, then we might be experiencing some technical difficulties.
Yeah, it says that there are 2 callers, and then there was one person that had raised their hand, so there might have been 3, but I don't know. But there goes. So yeah, there's like.
Thank you for your comment, Lina. And Chair Jamalian, you're right. So currently there are 3 individuals waiting to speak, and I'm going to unmute the first individual now. Hello, caller. You're up. Please proceed. Hello?
Yes,
Hello.
go ahead.
Sorry, everybody. I apologize for that. I've been having some difficulties with my laptop today. That's why I'm on my phone. I'm Ray Connolly. I'm one of the founders of Seaweed, which is located at, on Taylor Street, up the street from this proposed project. And I've been working on this project since 2016, just to give you a little bit of color. And as everyone else that's on this call, I'm very, very taken back. And Michael Christensen, no offense, but the response from both departments, you're not taking in consideration of the whole equity program, the 600 square foot rule and regulation. And yes, there is a loophole in the zoning. And so I'm going to be very, very, very brief right now. I would like to propose that we augment and change and edit the police code to not allow any type of businesses like this going forward, just to be very short, because it will blow up the whole equity community. It will completely disrupt all neighborhoods across the city. And I think instead of trying to create legislation around this and try to create permitting around this, I propose that as a committee and as a cannabis community, equity partners, we stand together and we propose to take this legislation out of the police code. Thank you.
Thank you, caller.
Thank you,
Chair
Ray.
Jamali, I'm going to move on to the next caller. Hello, caller. You are up. Please proceed.
Good afternoon, committee members. I prefer to remain anonymous. I believe that's my right. I just want to speak against this proposal of an accessory permit. I understand it may be in the planning code, but I do not support it being brought into the police code. I believe it disrupts the equity program and is a threat to the equity program. I believe it disrupts an already saturated market that 600 feet rule already put pressures on. I believe it disrupts a carefully crafted process that was gone through several years ago and is in all works. And it just disrupts a program that, while there's been challenges, is currently in process and working, and is not necessary, needed, and then does not need to be crafted for essentially one project that will open it up for a potential flood wave of creative applications throughout the city. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment. Hello, caller. You're up next. Please proceed.
Hey, this is Ed Brown, cannabis activist, Cannabis Partnership. This is an interesting, I think, piece of legislation. And if we're being fair here and being clear here and using our equity lenses to guide this conversation, then this actually creates more opportunities for equity applicants. There are many equity applicants who don't just want to do cannabis and cannabis as itself. They want to operate yoga studios. They want to do entertainment. They want to hold comedy shows, those kind of things, and be a part of the entertainment and not just run a cannabis opportunity. This accessory use would be able to allow them to do that. It also would allow them to have their projects that they're currently sitting on while they're in the queue to be able to switch that potentially and have that be an accessory unit and have some other purpose. Again, the equity program was created not just to satisfy equity partners. It was created so that equity people would have more chances to operate within this industry. And so this opportunity allows them that. I do agree with the other caller that the 600-foot buffer should be maintained, and that's fairness in what we've established in the city for people who've already put in applications. I think there's a lot to unpack in this part. It looks like the planning is already on there. I would like to see Office of Cannabis still put the same considerations for whether that's equity shelf space for accessory use, or still the priority permitting being an accessory use and that equity applicant, still putting those same processing and qualifications that they have in the structure and just applying those to the accessory use. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comment. We will move on to the next speaker. Hello, caller. You're up next. Please proceed.
All right. Thank you, Ray. Hi, everybody. Thank you for welcoming my comment here today. My name is William Dolan. I'm an equity applicant, cannabis business owner, and member of the San Francisco Cannabis Retailers Alliance. First and foremost, I'd like to say if there is an accessory use permit that is created for cannabis uses in general, it must be subject to all of the same rules and regulations that principally permitted and conditional use permittees are subject to. I think that's key. I'm not against accessory use permits, but there needs to be a fair and equitable balance here, and everyone needs to be subject to the same rules. Cannot allow for an exception to the code. Now, the precedent that was set by the issuance of this letter of determination, in my opinion, is directly contradictory and incredibly damaging to the existing standards of law and public policy that apply to cannabis retail use generally here in the city of San Francisco. If we exempt accessory uses from the requirements of the planning code, like this LOD highlighted, and the zoning controls, such as the 600-foot anti-clustering rule, that runs directly afoul of the legislative intent of our cannabis regulations. It runs against the equity program, the intentions of the equity program, and it specifically goes against the police code, which does not contemplate or authorize accessory use permits. So creating an exception to the 600-foot rule like this for accessory uses would be incredibly damaging, not just to our existing retailers, but even more so to our equity applicant permittees that have been investing their lives into developing their businesses in compliance with all the complex rules and regulations that currently apply to all industry operators in San Francisco. Right, so the code and generally now, if we exempt these uses from the code and from the 600-foot rule, we could run into a situation where you have almost any business. You know, the floodgates will open and businesses such as restaurants, music venues, museums, bowling alleys, movie theaters, coffee shops, clothing stores, bookstores, corner stores, gas stations, barbershops, hair salons, gyms, you name it, will start selling cannabis. This is absolutely ridiculous and we cannot proceed in this fashion. We got to keep things equitable. We got to keep things regulated. And I think, you know, applying all the existing rules to accessory uses is really the only path forward that makes sense for our industry and specifically for our equity program and for equity applicants. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
And we will move on to the next speaker. Hello, caller. You're up next. Please proceed.
Greetings, Oversight Committee. This is Johnny Delaplane, calling on behalf of the San Francisco Cannabis Retailers Alliance. This is an interesting one, right? This came across my plate, and we looked at it, and I was just baffled why we would even consider as a city allowing cannabis retail as an accessory use when we already have so many dispensaries in the queue, when there's already likely going to be too many dispensaries in the market and San Francisco can support. I'm going to have to agree with Will that if we are going to open it up for accessory use, that they're going to have to abide by all of the same rules as the cannabis retailers, including the 600-foot buffer. It's just a Pandora's box. If we approve one project as an accessory use, then all of a sudden we've got a whole host of other projects that are going to try to get to the best locations in the city and, you know, kind of get under that accessory use clause. So I know that, you know, legislation would need to be carried and passed to the Board of Supervisors in order for this to go forward. But my request would be to the Cannabis Oversight Committee is to, you know, give advice to the board as is your mandate, written in your mandate, and say, we don't believe accessory use should be considered until a time where we have gotten the current path of every retail or cultivator, whatever, completed, and we know what this ecosystem is looking like, and if it's even sustainable. At this point, we don't yet know if the amount of retailers that are going to be in the city is sustainable. I don't think it is if we get to, you know, 80 or 100 retailers, but people that have already started the process 100% deserve to finish it, right? We can't cut the pipeline in half like we did in Article 33. That caused a ton of problems. Doing it now would cost even more. So my recommendation is instruct the Board of Supervisors that we don't want accessory permits until we can get to a point of stabilization with the current social equity retailers that are coming through the pipeline. So thank you very much for your time. I look forward to your discussion.
Thank you.
Chair Jamali, I see no other individuals waiting to speak, and I'm going to check the chat function now. Chair Jamali, I don't see any written comments submitted to the chat function.
Thank you, Ray.
Our public comment section.
I think this is, I've seldom seen a point that rallied so many different views and peers in the industry together around it. So I'd like to really open this up for discussion. I think we all have our thoughts on it. So I'd really like to hear what my fellow committee members think, especially, you know, the retail components that will be directly impacted by this. So I'm just going to give the floor to any of my fellow members that want to start discussions.
Yeah. So I had to put my interesting hat on for this one because I agree with everybody. This is interesting. So literally what the hat says, it says interesting. So I hear what everybody else is saying as well. As far as accessory use, it would have been a wonderful opportunity had it been included at the very beginning. But because, you know, like we already set something in motion, you know, like, and we're struggling through getting people permitted and all these other things, like it would disrupt the opportunity and kind of be a slap in the face to everybody that, you know, has, you know, put their horse in the race very early on. You know, like the project that it's in question, like the project that was brought up that actually like incited this whole conversation is a cannabis museum, right? So like if this cannabis museum wants to be inclusive, maybe there could be some sort of like rotating like accessory use permit that actually includes the existing retailers so that there is an opportunity for the community to like participate in this cannabis museum, you know, and therefore it achieves both goals of one, supporting the existing community that is here, as well as providing an educational experience for cannabis in our city, right? So there is like potential for a win-win situation versus a win-lose situation in this if people really want to get creative about how this could be truly inclusive, unless they really thought about accessory use being their like bread and butter or something. But as noted by Michael Christensen, it has to be subordinate and related and not the main event, right? So if they're trying to achieve that, maybe they can be more creative and including existing operators. I would say that we are more of at benefit in approving for accessory use of standalone lounges versus standalone retail. I mean, like accessory retail, if what we're looking for is an enhancement of lifestyle within the city of San Francisco in regards to the cannabis community. So those are my initial thoughts on this particular subject.
And I think you make some really valid points. I do see one problem just with this particular one. If you're being buffered out by, I think, you know, Ray Connolly, who made a public comment, he went through the social equity program. He went and got his permit. So if you're being buffered out by a social equity applicant, I don't think it constitutes fairness to then bring in all the other retailers to also compete. That would make it even more unfair. I think this is a really difficult subject. And as long as one thing that I heard where I feel like most public comments agreed on, and also we all seem to be nodding our head, is that nobody wants to impede on the existing licensing program. The order, we have MCDs who've been waiting for I don't know how many years to get processed. They were the ones that paved the way, were used by the health department as use cases. So I'm personally, I live in the city. It's important to me that we have more lifestyle, to Nina's point, more places where people can consume and convene. Ed Brown made an interesting comment. I don't think that there is a cannabis event license organizer type. The city doesn't have one for it yet, but there is a state type already. I see more of a pathway to working towards that, which also has a lower entry barrier for some equity applicants because it doesn't require a massive space. You can use other spaces as long as they're compliant. So I feel like we should discuss accessory use only in the context of, does it comply with the existing people that are pulling permits? That's, I think, is the most important part.
Jump in here. Thought that was some excellent points we got from public comment, as well as from the other committee members. I think all of us would love to see cannabis sold everywhere. At least most of us, speak for everybody on this committee, it should be sold everywhere. But we're coming into an existing regulatory scheme. What are we, 4 years into it? And people have, spent millions of dollars and sacrificed their life savings and, you name it. And, if anything, I think that the 600-foot spacing requirement has already kind of caused some potential clustering issues, as well as proliferation of retail and a corresponding shortage of supply chain applications. And so I think allowing more retail in through this accessory use pathway, particularly if it's going to allow for bypassing of the current zoning limitations, would really create a proliferation problem and would undermine the integrity of this whole program and this whole process that everyone's gone through, and the sacrifices that everybody's made, all these hundreds of applicants that we've seen. But to Mr. Brown's point, I do think that the cannabis retail accessory use is really interesting. I do think about stuff like that was mentioned by, I think, Mr. Dolan's food and entertainment venues come to mind off the top. But I think with where we're at in the process and not knowing what the landscape's going to look like when all these applications that are out there are processed, to change to allow accessory use at this time would be irresponsible. And I think my position is that I do like the idea of it if we started from the beginning again, like committee member Park said when she began her statement. But right now to come in and do it it just undermines everybody and everything here. And if there were even a conversation about accessory use, I would think that, like, as a threshold issue, it would have to be fully compliant with all of the other regulations, particularly the 600-foot spacing requirement, to even be considered. And it would have to enhance the existing infrastructure that we're all working so hard to put in place, not conflict with it or create more havoc for people. So I would, I don't think that this time it's an issue that the Board of Supervisors needs to look at. I think it's premature. I would say a couple years from now, after we've got a good idea of what the landscape looks like and the viability and so forth, then possibly the board could come back and take a look at it. I think right now, if anything, they should be figuring out ways to incentivize people to or landlords or opportunities to rent to manufacturers and distributors and other supply chain categories where we have a shortage in San Francisco, and there's a lot of opportunity for equity applicants. I think encouraging more retail competition is just not responsible, and I don't think it's fair to those, not just Ray, who's a couple hundred feet away, or pardon me, Seaweed is a couple hundred feet away from that location, but even other applicants that are half mile away but have been in line for 4 years and have their life savings invested in it. Now suddenly a giant accessory use dispensary is going to open up that's going to cut into what their plans were. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, and to add to that stabilization, what Johnny Delaplane said, we don't have a stable market yet. I think Brendan, you saying 4 years is actually very, very flattering, because I remember we didn't have an equity program till mid-2018. So it's really hasn't even really been 4 years yet, right? So to that point, I'd also like to add that reading, I know that I saw in the OOC presentation about that the products would have to be made on site. This is obviously derived from the letter of determination. But as anyone, and I wish Aaron was on this call, but anyone that's ever cultivated and manufactured, which I have, this business plan isn't even really realistic. So I would have wished that the zoning administrator, when we are in a position where the city has such a unique body of expertise assembled around one committee, could have sent a few questions, and we would have probably been happy to shed some light upon, like, the actual viability of such a project, right? So there's a bit obviously of a disconnect here.
Chair Jamalian, just as a point of clarification, the slide that you're referring to in the OOC presentation, these were just factors to consider. They were not requirements. They were not any stipulations to the accessory use. These were just factors that we were including, saying here are some things that the committee may want to consider if this type is going to move forward. So it wasn't a requirement or a condition that the OOC was representing. These are just factors to
Oh,
consider.
no, I figured you got those from the LOD because that's how that LOD was written, that was the business plan at the facility was to cultivate a little bit, use that plan to make something with it, sell it at the gift shop, to break it down really simply, but it was just not viable on 900 square feet. So what I'm saying is this could have been even a better letter of determination if this committee had been consulted, essentially, right?
Chair Jamali, and if I could clarify.
Yeah.
I think the letter was discussing cultivation. So the letter is discussing the issue of cannabis retail as an accessory use, but also other activities like cultivation is also not permitted there. So the point I believe that we were trying to make with that letter of determination was that cultivation is a permissible activity also as an accessory use, but that the amount of cultivation that could occur needs to be limited. So they can they can cultivate a certain amount up to an amount that they can sell on site, but they couldn't use that as like a separate cultivation operation.
Yeah, that's exactly how I understood it. Sorry if I wasn't clear. Yeah.
Yeah, but not that the only things that could be sold at the site are ones that are cultivated there.
Okay, so they could theoretically then sell any product they would want, as long as it bears that brand and that signage of that place. Is that correct?
So there's currently no limitation in the planning code, which is what the letter of determination was referencing. And the point that we have really been trying to stress is there is no limitation in our code currently because there is no viable path for this type of project currently in city code overall. So if there was some attempt to make this something that could happen throughout city code, there would be limitations built into our code, built into the police code. There's a time for discussion of that, but that doesn't exist right now. And also, just to be very clear, there is no legislation currently proposed, under review, or as I'm aware being drafted. This is not something that's being proposed by the planning department, the OOC, or currently any supervisor or the mayor. This is just something that someone in the community has asked about, and possibly if a supervisor is amenable to the idea, they could start the legislative process, but this is not something that's being currently legislated.
I understand.
Chair Jamalian, can I get in the queue, please?
Please, Doug.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, again, my camera's not on. I really appreciate the public comment here and the comments of my fellow board members or committee members, because this is, I agree, it's an interesting and complicated issue. And on the surface, my initial reaction would be we should be figuring out ways to allow complementary uses in businesses. However, as we dig into it a little, I think about this, and I think about, as many of you have raised, this issue of all of these companies who are trying to get up and running or who have jumped through an incredible amount of hurdles to open up their businesses. And I think it's always a good reminder that everybody came out of the shadows to do this. And the harder we make it, for people to get up and running, the more incentive, in my opinion, there is for people to just stay in the shadows there. And so to allow this seems like we're moving the target on everybody who's been trying to get across the finish line. I don't know if I'm using the right metaphor, but hopefully it makes sense. So I gotta go with everybody here who says that we need to let the companies that are in the queue be opening their retail. We need to protect them. We need to protect the equity applicants. And I have to agree with Johnny Delaplane when he said doing this would be opening up a Pandora's box. So just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. And I agree. I'd love your opinion on this, Sean, as someone who has gone through this, gotten his retail permits, is one of our first equity dispensaries. I'd love your opinion, Sean. How do you feel about this?
I mean, it's a decision that we all have to understand that, you know what I'm saying. But being that that being the first equity going through this process, it was basically, me not knowing and understanding this whole process. But then after, knowing it and feeling that, the outcomes of where I'm at now, and just trying to I don't know, man. I'm kind of on the borderline. I'm up in the air with it. I really, it's really hard for me to kind of like express certain things about that right now. I'm just kind of like on the borderline with it.
Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it. That being said, I think my take from this is that the industry in general doesn't seem to have a problem with a sensible accessory use. Clearly, the way that this LOD was clearly none of us want to impede on anybody who went through the process within the framework that exists, and we don't want to undermine our licensing program, our social equity program, or anything associated with that, whether that's the 600-foot buffer rule, whether that's the order in which permitting would be affected if this accessory use was created. So I'll defer to my committee members if they want to make a motion or for this particular item.
I just want to make, I don't want to make a motion, but I want to make a quick comment about the potential motion. Is kind of going back and forth about how to craft the motion for this, and I feel like right now probably the best way to approach it is by saying that it's not the time to even approach accessory uses. I don't think if we make, and I'm not making a motion here, but I'm thinking if we even start talking about the way an accessory use ordinance is crafted, then we open the door, and I still kind of look at it and go like, it's just too early for us to know what the landscape's going to look like with cannabis retail and the cannabis economy. So I'm nervous about doing any sort of motion or recommendation that even talks about crafting an accessory use at this point. I kind of feel like it's just premature. I'm open to it down the line, and I think it's something that I want to incorporate it down the line. But I think right now, in terms of, I think it's early, and I think the lounges is a separate issue. I think that can be done as a separate issue. So, but in terms of an accessory use retail, I just feel like it's premature for us to even open the discussion of the details of it. So I'm going to advocate for just not doing any accessory use permit at this time until things play out a little bit more in the current landscape. But I want to hear what my other commissioners think before I come to a final decision or make a motion.
I'm with you, Helen, and I definitely think that now is not the time for this conversation, and like allowing it to take up precious time where we have like the mayor's amendments and other things that actually need to move forward, and we have to make some priorities. So where this is a really interesting conversation, where it is something that will eventually have to be talked about, it shouldn't take up more of our time.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that our industry as a whole and our program is way too immature at this point to even go down this route. So that being said, there's no motion on the floor. We can close the item. Is that correct?
Chair Jamali and Michael Christensen with planning. Could I make one final point? Just because I'm hearing some consternation about the contents of the LOD itself. So I just want to be clear that the zoning administrator's determination is appealable to the Board of Permit Appeals for 15 days after the date of the letter. The letter was reissued on August 18th. So any member of the public that would like to appeal the determination of the zoning administrator can do so by contacting the Board of Appeals and filing an appeal by Thursday, September 2nd.
Thank you, Michael.
So do we want to make a motion to recommend that the board not create a accessory use permit at this time? Or do we want to just omit any motion?
No, I think that's a fair recommendation from our committee. Like after this conversation and hearing from the constituents, I think it would be responsible for us to just let them know what we discussed here.
I support Member Parks because I'm afraid if we don't make a recommendation, then one of the board members may unknowingly pick this up, hearing from one of their constituents.
So do we have a motion on the floor?
Yeah, I will make a motion to recommend to the Board of Supervisors that we do not take up accessory use permits at this time.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, John. Can we get a vote, please?
Chair Jamalian, just a quick point of clarification / question. Are these accessory uses more generally or accessory use cannabis retail? And I asked that from a, did you want to be
I
more
believe we
specific
said
or
cannabis use retail to the point of Member Hallinan, who said an accessory use for manufacturing, et cetera, would be positive, would have a positive impact and might actually bump some people up the line. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yes, accessory use retail. Yes.
Okay, so the vote is to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to not take up accessory use permits for retail at this time.
And just to be clear, probably want to add cannabis if the chair agrees with that, just in
Yes.
the abundance of caution.
I think all of us think that's implied, but thank you, Nikesh.
Just pointing it out, but I agree with you.
So should I restate it, or does a member want to restate the motion?
You could restate it, I believe.
Okay, so the motion is to recommend to the Board of Supervisors not to take up accessory use permits for cannabis retail at this time.
Yes.
Okay, so seat 8, Ali Jamalian.
Aye.
Seat 11, Doug Block.
Aye.
Seat 12, Sean Richard.
Aye.
Seat 13, Nina Parks.
Aye.
And seat 14, Brendan Hallinan.
Aye.
So motion carries with 5 yays, 3 members absent, and 1 seat vacant.
Thank you, John. That way, agenda item number 6 is now closed. And I think we're pretty good in time, right, Nikesh? We had a 15-minute break.
That sounds good.
Great. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. Thank you, everybody.
And with that, Ray, would you mind putting us in practice session, and we will resume in 15 minutes, so 3:01 p.m.
All right, thank you. We're back from our break, and I think we're on agenda item number 7. Discussion around the policy recommendations for distribution to the Board of Supervisors. I think we should just start with public comment. If we want to adapt these recommendations as is. Otherwise, I would move to discussion regarding any changes to the recommendations. So asking my fellow committee members, are there any changes that you guys want to make to these recommendations? John, thank you for anticipating my next question. Thank you.
I wanted to brought this up during the meeting minutes, but I think the recommendations say 10%. The meeting minutes said 15% for, I think it was number 4. Sorry, I don't, for the social equity product.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to make sure we're consistent. This should read 15% as I understand it from earlier, from when we discussed it during the meeting minutes.
Correct.
Member
Right.
Howland, this is Nikesh. Just a quick point. What everyone is seeing on the screen before them, these are the recommendations from the November 18th meeting. The recommendations from the July 14th meeting would be the ones that reflect the changes based on the conversation and recommendations that the committee voted on during the last meeting. So, John, it may be a little bit more useful to have this set of recommendations up, but also put up the July 14th recommendations. And to Member Hallinan's point, if those recommendations say 10% versus 15, then to make the correction. But I just want to make sure we're looking at the right recommendations.
Yeah, I think we just have to work off the July 14th one, then we should.
Yeah. Yeah, because we made those off of these already. So let's just
Okay,
work
hold
on
on one second. Let me find the right ones.
Right, and Chair Jamalian, if I remember correctly, the board revisited recommendations 1 through 6 during the last meeting. The committee did not speak to 7 and 8. So 1 and 6 have been discussed. 7 and 8 were still on the table. Is that right?
Correct. We actually only have 2 open items. That's why I said we can just go through 1 through 6, sign those off as is, or make any last amendments to put up for a vote at the end of the meeting. That would be helpful, so we can focus on items 7 and 8.
I think 7 and 8 were, I remember that committee member Cry had the input on those 2, right? Or at least on 7, I think. And I don't think we got to that, did we? Or was it?
I will defer to Doug on this one, which is actually the reason we're holding him hostage in this meeting today.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here. Glad to be here.
We were deferential on number 7, I think, to our experts from labor on that one.
Well, thank you. This is maybe the one that I can speak to. The last discussion around all the permitting and planning is one that I defer to you folks. I will say that in many industries in San Francisco, we have these labor harmony requirements, which range in, it's very similar to the LPA requirements that exist in state law. And really, in many instances, what the city has done is to go out and protect their interests and also the interests of workers. But you may remember, we had that big hotel strike a few years ago. The city doesn't want labor disputes interfering with the regular course of business. So labor harmony is something they have done in many, and worker retention requirements are simply when a business changes hands, that protects workers so that it gives them a chance to stay with their jobs, in most cases for 90 days. And then the new employer has the chance to go through and interview everybody and make personnel changes at that point in time. So, like I said, it's in a lot of different industries, and this has been our push to just make the cannabis industry in line with everybody else in San Francisco.
Doug, I just want to clarify, as I don't fully understand. So this would be like, would this be like a common set of items that go in like all labor LPAs across all unions in this in the cannabis space, or is this something?
Yeah, this would be a common thing that would be going into the permitting requirements for cannabis businesses, just like any other permitting requirement.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's more specific than what we have now, which is if you have more than 10 or more employees, you have to have an LPA with the LPA in place.
Yes. Yes. And the
Is-
worker, I'd have to go back, my apologies, but I'd have to look at the different worker retention ordinances. I suspect for very small, like micro businesses, that there's some sort of exemption that exists on those things as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's a good point. I'm glad you raised that.
I'd like to know more about this. It seems interesting. And maybe I'll even hit you up offline about it.
Sure.
Or I'll talk to Teresa about it. Yeah, because I think, I mean, right now it's just up to each particular labor union, right? That does an LPA to negotiate those protections into their LPA, or was this beyond? This is beyond that, right? This would be set of standards.
I think that remains to be seen. I think we want. I think the recommendation to develop labor harmony is right, rather than spelling out here exactly what it looks like, because there could be a good argument that having a signed LPA in hand does constitute labor harmony, quite honestly. But I think we all know that not everybody is doing that right now, and enforcement from the state on the LPA requirement or is lacking, as it is in many other areas. So I think that would be open to discussion if we get this recommendation forward about exactly what constitutes labor harmony. And it's not going to, I can say right here, it's not going to be your employees need to be members of a union. That's not going to be the labor harmony requirement, and that does not exist in any industry, because that's not something that San Francisco, as much as some of the members of the Board of Supervisors would like to mandate, and I think the city attorney's office will back me up, that's not something they can legally do. So I just throw that out there because I don't want to scare anybody with this recommendation.
Brandon, any suggestions how to is the wording on how to word that recommendation in this case?
I'm sorry, I got a bunch of open screens. I was doing a little research while we were talking it over. I'm sorry. Can we go down to that last one, number 7, John?
I'm using the notes from last meeting.
Sorry, yeah. You know what? I'll pull it up over here. I got it here. I don't want to impose on you here. Like I said, I just got confused because I was switching between screens, looking up labor harmony stuff. Development. Yeah, I mean, I guess. Oh, sorry. I guess
sorry, John, if you pull up item number 3, I can see it in a tab that's where recommendation 7 and 8 will be. Wait, yeah, sorry, item number 7. Yeah, I see it's the tab 2 tabs over. That's where 7 and 8 will be, so people can see what the language is.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, it's. I guess my only question would be is it's a little vague. If you feel comfortable with it, I think it's fine. I support it. I just, I think it's taken language that was suggested by, I think it was either Teresa or Jessica or yourself, Doug, and so seems fine to me. Ali, to answer your question.
Thank you. Well, that's one more off our list. So then going to 8, we have 8. I think 8 was pretty straightforward. There was not really much to discuss there either. Could we scroll up just to get everyone to sign off on these? Okay, so yeah, so to your point earlier, Nikesh, 1 through 6 were signed off. We just worked on 7, and I think 8 is pretty straightforward. So
Are we looking at November? Are we looking at November here?
Yeah, sorry. Now, John, go to item number 3 for 1 through 6. That was changed last meeting. Yep.
Okay, let's take a quick look at this. Make sure we got. Okay, sorry. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Emma.
Yeah, I believe 1 is accurate.
Okay. We look at 2. There we go, 15%.
I believe that's also accurate, especially 15% and revisiting when we have more data. That was the last stand of our motion.
SF verified equity brands. Okay. So it'd be the retailer's responsibility to verify it, I guess. Right. Okay.
I assume most brands will use that as an opportunity to give them a verification certificate of sort as it's recommended. It probably, I will do it, so I'm sure other people will as well. It's something that's a pathway that's created for each brand to then explore on their own, I feel.
Okay.
We move down to 3, please. This might make sense to also just add the revisiting of the accessory use and what we decided today. We could really just put that under point 4 since that is regarding planning code.
I'd support that.
I support that too.
So we'll just kind of take that motion and put that motion in without, the language that we passed in the motion and plug that in there.
Sure, after public comment, we should definitely do that.
Okay.
So moving on to 5, please. I think we were also pretty much all in agreement, so that just make sure that that's reflected in the verbiage.
Social equity applicants and operators, is that redundant? Shouldn't it just be social equity operators?
Yeah, applicants don't pay taxes. It's only the cannabis license that's taxed, isn't that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be something to note for our motion to strike applicant and board and
tax 0%. Yeah, there's no tax on an applicant, right? Unless the application fee or no. That's not what we're talking about though. Property.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So. Right, we tied in the apprenticeship and internships, which was important, and compassionate care. Perfect. Move on to item 6, unless you see something, Nina or Sean, Doug. So we addressed the subcommittee public comment on item number 6. And the next agenda item, Nina, which we're about to get to, and then also addresses your recommendation that we get a little presentation of what's going on here. So that would then be addressed in there. So we have a motion was approved unanimously. If we can keep scrolling down, please. Okay, so those were the recommendations. In that case, if my fellow members don't mind, I'd open up for public comment at this point.
Molly, the only other item to note is it's the recommendations, and then also the agenda item calls for the implementation of those recommendations. So if that's a conversation you want to have before public comment, you could have it. If it's after, that's fine as well. I just wanted to flag it that it's both the recommendations and their implementation, and that could be executed through a variety of means, however the committee sees best fit.
If we go up again, I feel like every item had its own implementation mechanics beneath it. So if we could just scroll up to one of the items, I feel the subtask to support the implementation of recommendations, they were already in the underneath the actual recommendations. So I felt like that would address that.
Right, and Chair Jamali, what I was referring to is I know that this committee in the past, they divvied up the committee itself, assigned a recommendation to a set of committee members and had them take ownership of that recommendation. So that's what I was referencing. If there was an additional implementation step that the committee may want to contemplate, it's not necessary, but just if we're finalizing the recommendations, and that maybe is a part of the conversation.
No, you're right. We did discuss that. I believe we had assigned Sarah, committee member Payan and Parks to the compassionate care tasks. Recommendation number 4. I feel like we have members of planning present on our board. Does that require a separate effort? Probably not. Please, anybody chime in if you disagree. I would actually probably make a motion to adapt as is. And there is obviously a cover letter that we're going to write with our recommendations, and we can probably voice then who's responsible for what on our committee within a cover letter.
We're going to draft a cover letter and send a cover letter to each of the members of the Board of Supervisors. Clerk.
Yeah, with our recommendations that, if they have any questions regarding compassionate care, these are the committee members to reach out to. If they have any, I think it's probably the easiest way to do this in terms of implementation. As you guys said, they'll still have to draw legislation language based on our recommendations. And then, we have another whole chance to address some of these issues when those drafts come out.
Chair Jamali, just as a matter of process, then if a member was to draft the cover letter, then it could be presented during the next oversight committee meeting for a vote, and then that could be a part of whatever is sent off. That's just something to keep in mind. If the cover letter is the route that the committee wants to take, that the committee would have to vote on it before it can be disseminated.
Understood. Well, in that case, I would basically say we adopt them as they are. I feel like implementation is pretty clear within the recommendations.
Also, I want to be clear that I've talked to a lot of the supervisors about these recommendations last year as we were going through, as we all voted on it last year. And then as the mayor's office was drafting the next presentation that we're going to see, we've talked about a lot of these recommendations with them. So it's not, none of the things that is on here, things that they have not yet heard of. However, as members of this committee push more of the items that they're super interested in, they can definitely take up, spearheading, those conversations, So,
yeah.
but they're not, none of these are foreign items to them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, every committee member can reach out to the supervisors on a personal level, on a one-on-one level, and then discuss why these recommendations were made. And I feel like that's how we have been doing it. So we should advocate for those all individually as committee members.
But yeah, totally.
for us to I mean, yes, I do think a cover letter is a nice touch, from the, like from the
Need it
committee.
if we have to vote on it. I don't, again, to Brendan's point, I don't think we need to make things more difficult. These recommendations are pretty straightforward. I think they make very clear what should be considered. It's to an extent, it is the supervisor's jobs to find the verbiage and make that work. So I feel if it's compliant with the agenda item, Nikesh, I would like to open it to public comment.
Okay, sir, before we do that, I'm sorry, real quick. I'm just wondering, like, maybe what we could do in without having to go through a full cover letter, but would be to like right at the beginning, just have like an introduction to the fact that, like, after committee meetings, meeting with comments from the public, stuff like that, these are the recommendations that have been adopted by the Cannabis Oversight Committee. So just like laying out how we came up with these real quick, like 1 or 2 sentences of after 2 years of committee meetings and numerous discussions with the public and different agencies and policymakers. These are the recommendations that we're formally submitting on behalf of the Cannabis Oversight Committee to the Board of Supervisors for adoption and implementation. Some along those lines.
Chair Howland, or Committee Member Hallinan, just to respond to that, if that is something that the committee would like to do, then the form that would take is Chair Jamalian or another committee member would work with RDA just to craft that language, and then RDA would send the recommendations to the Board of Supervisors from there.
Great. Wouldn't have to come back here again for another month, right? I think we just want to get it out at this point, so I don't want to delay it another month if that's the case. But if we could do it through the chair and the RDA and get it out before our next meeting, then let's go for it.
That's my understanding, but I may be wrong. I can ask Sarah if you're still on this call. If you could weigh in, that would be helpful. The question is that if a committee member was to add some sort of cursory language at the very beginning that introduces the set of recommendations, would that language have to be brought back before the committee for a vote before it could be sent to the Board of Supervisors with the recommendations that the committee has reviewed today and will vote on at some point today?
I don't see why the committee couldn't consider language to add now as part of this agenda item if someone wants to read that suggestion into the record and then sort of vote on it now.
Yeah, I think it was a pretty simple opener. Brendan, if you just want to repeat that, let's write it into the record, make a motion to adopt it. I just get it out. We'll basically have our letter draft. It won't take long.
Okay, so so what do you say, like in collaboration with the public, the Cannabis Oversight Committee for the public and city agencies, Cannabis Oversight Committee has adopted the following policy recommendations for the Board of Supervisors to implement into law or municipal code. What do you think?
I would just like to add and industry stakeholders to that. Other than that, I think industry stakeholders and equity community.
Yeah, equity community.
If we add those two, I'm pretty good with it. Should we open up for public comment then?
Yes, if you would like to, then what we could do is, Ray, go ahead and read off the instructions, and John, if you could also just pull up the agenda with the instructions so people can see how best to get public comment. I think we can proceed to public comment.
All right, thank you, John. Members of the general public who want to provide public comment on this particular agenda item can do so by submitting your written comment through the chat function, or you can dial 1-415-655-0001, input the access code, which is 146-708-4595, and press *3 when prompted to do so. You will be unmuted when it's your turn to speak, and each individual will have 3 minutes to provide your comment. I am going to check the attendee list now to see if there's anyone waiting in the queue. See none, and I'm going to move on to the chat function. Chair Jamalian, I don't see anyone waiting in line to speak, and I also don't see any written comments submitted to the chat function.
Thank you, Ray. In that case, I'll yield the floor back to my fellow committee members for making a motion regarding the recommendation.
Make a motion to approve along with the introductory language.
I'll second that.
Thank you. John, can we get a vote, please?
A motion to approve the recommendations to the Board of Supervisors along with the introductory language. Seat 8, Ali Jamalian.
Aye.
Seat 11, Doug Block. Seat 12, Sean Richard. I can come back to him.
Sean is on the list. He's probably experiencing some audio.
Seat 13, Nina Parks.
Aye.
Seat 14, Brendan Hallinan.
Aye.
And we just need a vote from Member Richard.
Sean, I just unmute you. Can you hear us? Hello, Sean. Can you hear us?
I think he does hear us. His phone is lighting up, but we can't hear him.
Okay, change the fucking days working, bro. This is how about that. Let's keep it moving.
Oh, he's busy.
Take that as an aye.
So, someone want to ping him or try to shoot him a call, see if it gets his attention at all?
Alina, I can give Sean a call if I can have a couple minutes to do that now.
Sorry, I was on another call. I apologize.
We were taking the vote on adopting the recommendations we had done and the discussions we just had regarding the introductory line.
Oh, aye.
Thank you. So with 5 ayes or yays, the motion carries. 3 members absent, 1 seat vacant.
Thank you, John. Closing item number, there's too many agendas here. Number 7 and moving on to 8, I believe. Discussion on ordinance file 210421, which is the mayor's ordinance. At this point, I will hand it over to the OOC to provide that brief presentation we mentioned earlier. Marissa, Ray, Nikesh, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Jamalian. I will provide a very brief presentation just to provide a recap of the legislation. And given the interest of time, I'll rush through it. If there are any questions, both Director Rodriguez and I, as well as other members of the team, will be available to field them. So at a very, very quick glance, the ordinance that we are speaking about here is ordinance file 210-421, and it proposes to amend Article 16. The way to think about what this legislation does sort of falls into three buckets. The one is to improve opportunities for equity. The specific provisions that fall into this bucket are the following. The proposed legislation would create priority processing for equity applicants that own 100% of the cannabis business. The legislation would also create priority processing for temporary permit holders that commit to supporting equity applicants through shared manufacturing, i.e. subleasing space to equity manufacturers. The legislation would also allow equity operators to receive equity incubation support during the capital intensive period of developing their businesses, i.e. during periods of construction. Previously, equity applicants were only able to receive support from equity incubators when they were permitted by the OOC. So this would change the point at which equity operators would be able to receive support. The other bucket to think through in terms of what the proposed legislation would do is preserving existing equity. This means that businesses that were established by equity applicants have to support equity goals if the percentage of the equity applicant ownership in the aggregate dropped below 20%. So if the equity applicant ownership dropped below 20%, then equity commitments would have to be made to support equity goals. They would include the following: contributing the equivalent of 1% gross revenues to one or more community organizations, supporting equity operators by purchasing products, equity products, making workforce commitments by providing training, mentorship, and equity hiring to equity applicants, or supporting equity businesses through incubation. Next slide. The next bucket to think about what this legislation would do is improving the application process, and the ways that the provisions that are proposed in the ordinance include reducing the time period before cannabis businesses can sell their businesses from 10 years to 5 years, allowing for cannabis businesses to be transferred in the case of death, removing a loophole in which equity incubators could support their own businesses, their own business interests, and clarifying the process for removing delinquent applications from the cannabis processing system. The status of this particular ordinance, it has been assigned to the Public Safety and Neighborhood Services Committee, but a date has not been scheduled yet, meaning that the next hearing date is unclear at this point. The legislation itself was introduced back in.
I believe there was a date. I'll find out, I'll verify.
Okay, thank you, Director Rodriguez. Looking at the LegStar site, it doesn't appear that one has been scheduled yet, but we will circle back to that if there has been a date. Thank you, Director Rodriguez. For now, the legislation has been assigned to the Public Safety and Neighborhood Services Committee. We'll provide an update in a moment if we have one. I turn the floor back to you, Chair Jamalian. If you have any questions, we're happy to take them at this time.
Yeah, I think we all probably have a few questions, just kind of off what I'm seeing. Can we clarify? So are MCDs at all considered in any of the transfer of ownership? Because they already have equity commitments. I understand that, but I feel like, again, like we're kind of leaving a lot of our MCDs, leaving them behind by not cutting them in onto this legislative update.
Are you speaking specifically about the equity preservation?
I'm speaking about actually the ownership change rule that the 10 years that were cut down to 5.
That would include, I believe that would include MCDs as well, all cannabis retail.
That's right. Okay. That's my understanding as well.
That's okay. That I think it'd be good if we clarify that, because I think there's definitely some ambiguity amongst pre-existing retailers.
Yeah, I believe that's in the language is in the ordinance. This is just a really like.
No, yeah, I did not get to drill that too deep in that, but yeah, it just should consider them as well, right?
No, they are. It is, and yeah, we will make a note of that to make sure it's clear.
From my understanding, after it goes to the Public Safety Committee, is that the last committee that looks at this, or was this ever going to cross? Is whatever we decide today sort of our committee's input on this?
Yeah, I believe this would be it unless we meet again before it goes to the full board, but I believe that's right. And we've talked about it at prior meetings as well.
All right, I'm saying, so this is it. So we're gonna want to we're gonna want to be clear around it.
Chance, Ollie, this is
All
it.
right.
But there'll be an opportunity for public comment as it goes through the process as well, and opportunity to potentially make changes.
I would actually defer to Brendan, Nina, Sean, and Doug if there's anything that you guys want to add to it. I think it's definitely it's a step in the right direction.
I would want to follow up actually on that MCD issue in terms of the priority. Sorry, I have a lot of. So I noticed it said that pre-existing operators. All right, let me get to the digest here. I'm looking at the can be reprioritized by sharing space.
Yeah, so that's speaking specifically about temporary permit holders, supply chain operators who are manufacturers, for example, that they would be prioritized to be to get annual permits if they commit to shared manufacturing.
Shared manufacturing, okay. So other than a manufacturer, so for example, like a retailer, an MCD obviously couldn't share their retail space.
Yeah, it doesn't count for retail so much.
And there's no other pathway for them to do it, like an incubator or something like that.
To make it swifter to be processed.
Yeah.
Well, right now we're technically processing tier 4. And so this was drafted a little bit a while ago, as you know, so it's been kind of taking a little time to get there. So I think it actually will be moot by the time this becomes law.
Okay.
So we are in the process of processing all of our MCDs and our temporary permits tier 4. It's a slow process, but it's happening. But yeah, no, I mean, if you can think of a way that a commitment to incubate someone outside of regular requirements like a transfer requirement or something like that, maybe there could be a way to prioritize them.
I mean,
in a similar
I
way.
feel like if a dispensary committed to purchasing from an incubatee, that's pretty big. I mean, that it's not easy to sell this stuff sometimes. So it would help if you had an existing committee, like if there's an incubator and an incubatee, why can't that incubatee feed two entities to get their permanent license?
Can I ask a clarifying question, Chair Jamalian?
Please.
Do you mean they will both share the same physical space, or just
Well, no, it's not possible for a dispensary to provide space, but it's possible for a dispensary to provide shelf space to an incubatee who is working now out of another manufacturer who has a pathway to use an incubation program to get his temporary license turned into a. So why not, if those two parties also had a deal with a MCD that was to say, we will commit to $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, a certain volume, that I feel like that MCD is increasing the chance of this equity applicant success and should have the same benefit that the manufacturer gets.
That's right. I think that's a good point. But I think right now we do have this requirement for MCDs who are seeking adult use authorization from our office, right? And for existing operators, I think when operators need to fulfill their equity goal, one of the things they're doing is actually share some shelf space for equity products. So it's already a requirement, but I can see that it could increase the amount.
There's a disconnect between the actual practice of that and the legislation, and it's very difficult to prove what you're saying. It's very easy to prove that this applicant who is now attached to 2 temporary licenses, all you have to do is ask them if they're all fulfilling their commitment. I just feel like it's an easier way to enforce it, and more community members benefit from it, frankly.
Yeah, and I might suggest maybe evaluating or using the opportunity to evaluate the process and maybe making it a little tighter, to your point. Maybe that's what we should be focusing on, like how to make those commitments a little sounder. Certainly wanting there to be flexibility right now, similar to the conversation we were having a little earlier, still early in the process, still folks trying to just, get their grounding and get rooted. But I think there will come a time when maybe we do want to reevaluate the commitments being made to shelf space, et cetera. We can speak to that.
I just think it would help the equity at the incubator, because there's already financial firms that offer like financing purchase orders. So if you have a standing purchase order for a small equity manufacturer, that would be the difference between being able to buy their raw ingredients or not. So I do think we should give the MCDs some sort of chance to get in on the incubation of a manufacturer, because the supply chain is worthless without the retailers. So it's a really interesting opportunity to tie them in together.
Yeah, I also want to bring up that the reason why this was put in, the intention behind it was because early conversations about equity opportunities were very retail focused. So that's why we have this gap in equity products. And so like when the MCDs were like making those commitments and not being able to fulfill those commitments because there wasn't enough equity products, right? Like this was like a way to be able to get people the opportunity now. So like we have existing manufacturers that could open up their spaces because they're not running their equipment, like 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, right? So they had the opportunity to actually get, like be able to service, like equity manufacturers, right? So the idea was to be able to make that opportunity open across all supply chains, since the initial conversations around equity were heavy on retail. And then there was like, there isn't enough equity products for people to actually fulfill those requirements that need to be tightened up.
I was just basically saying a sales guarantee for that person that goes into that space and produces, that they would then also get a sales guarantee from an MCD. And that way they don't have to worry about building their sales from those products that they're making out of that shared facility.
Completely understand, but then also to, the OCC's point and Marissa's point is that there are already existing promises that have not necessarily been fulfilled to the way that they're supposed to. So like maybe that first, and then like
to an extent, so the reward was as ambiguous as the promise. So we do have to like be very clear about this.
Because the thing is like there was the opportunity during the initial discussions to say, hey, actually equity first, no MCD anything. Y'all don't, you guys don't cross over until equity gets their licensing, period. But since they made those commitments to be able to provide equity shelf space, then that's why they were, like allowed to just move forward without a break in their business to go into adult use. Because that's what was happening during that time.
I remember that well. I mean, we were bending, but I still think that when you intertwine the two, that it's easier to track. To your point, you can't prove it. So when you can't prove it, and every time a new tier gets put above you and you don't get processed, then the promise is as ambiguous as the reward. So I think to Marissa's point, we just need to tighten that up. I feel like one way to tighten it up is to tie them together to one incubator, get a sales guarantee for that incubator that can be easily reported with metric transfers. This is happening. I'm getting the support I was promised. And I'm sure most MCDs would be happy to do that, as they are struggling to find good equity products. So
that's a good point. And I would love to hear public comment for those MCDs that have had challenges, just to kind of get a sense of what's been difficult. But I think that's a good point. Both.
So any more comments from the committee? Because I think we are running really low on time.
Totally, but also being able to move on, like we need some discussion on like the problem that 100% ownership by multiple equity applicants, this wording allows for no equity to be given in regards to fundraising. So this would suggest that all equity applicants would have to have all their money already if 100% of the business is owned by a combination of verified equity applicants versus majority of the percentage owned by multiple equity applicants. I know that this is also a verbiage that's being proposed for a statewide equity definition that is being talked about on multiple levels. I actually have a meeting after this with the Black Caucus presenting the statewide equity definition being proposed. But this recommendation right here doesn't allow for any fundraising to happen. So it needs to be, we need to at least, figure out a recommendation that makes more sense for regular business. And then also in regards to the sale from like 10 to 5, I mean, I've been talking to a lot of people from multiple jurisdictions, and like everybody thinks that any restriction, a lot of people that I've talked to thinks that any restriction on sales is kind of messed up because there's no industry anywhere that restricts anybody from selling their business for a matter of any amount of years, so just kind of, I know, I understand like when we were fighting for it, there was like this need for protections because we already had businesses that were running and nobody wanted to be diluted out of their company. So like the 10-year provision allowed it, allowed folks to at least get people that were wanting to buy into their company or have some like partnership to understand that this is for a long haul and not like a quick flip. However, again, like 5 years, I mean, like there is no industry that restricts people on like how much time they have to
I think it's important to note that these protections are probably one of the reasons that we have issued so many equity applications. And these protections are probably also the reason that many equity applicants, despite their track records, are now owners of really cool stores. So I think going from 10 to 5 is quite generous. I think it actually retains the value of those permits that we work so hard to get. And anyone that's built a facility or a dispensary knows that you need that time to recoup your money. Even 5 years from point of actual submission of license is pretty tight to recoup money, especially for supply chain place. So I'm heavily in favor of keeping it at minimum 5 years.
And I'll also add just an acknowledgement of Nina's point that we're also counting the time spent in processing toward that 5 years. So really at the end of the day, for most people, it's probably no years by the time they're done, or 2 or 3. So I think that's a nice balance as far as the protections that Ali is referring to, and I think the concerns that you had. And then also remembering that this 10-year rule still stands until it's changed. And there was a reason way back that it was, there was a strong desire, I'll just say that it be a part of this. So, and hopefully equity preservation can also be there to help get us to a place that the industry would like to see. I know you're not the only one, Nina, that feels this way. But yet there's others that feel 10 is reasonable. So kind of trying to get there, but I hear your point.
I fought for the 10 years in the beginning, but like as time moves on, like I also know that people would like to move on with their own lives and maybe have other endeavors and other partnerships that they would like to pursue.
Totally. And it being very important too, that as these businesses are sold, that we don't end up in a city with 0 equity businesses because they all get bought out. And so that's where equity preservation is so key. But certainly being mindful of the process and giving people a space to get rooted.
Yeah, so it takes about, on average, 2 years to get your permit. And a 3-year-old business is a business that just passed its infancy. So I really don't think that 5 years is very hindering. You're not going to get that great of evaluation after a year or 2 in this business when that's very capital heavy up front. So any other points that we want to address as a committee, or should we open up to public comment?
I have one. I just wanted to clarify the language about the acknowledgement of the receipt. So I'm just going back in time in my brain here. So everyone submitted their applications in kind of a rush, or not everyone, but a lot of people did in a frenzy on the first date that applications were accepted. And then there was a timestamp that was received once those were in. Is that considered the acknowledgement, or is it when the Office of Cannabis actually began to process each particular application based on the order they were received and the tier that they were in? Or is it just the original timestamp of when it was first initially submitted? Do you know, Marissa?
I believe it's a timestamp thing when it was
Okay.
submitted. I believe so, because that's just kind of starts the journey.
Yeah,
I'll
because
double
there's a
check.
big difference. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
potentially a big
No,
difference for
I think
somebody.
it's timestamp. I think it's timestamp.
Okay.
And I actually have one question as well that you guys mentioned that there is a mechanism to get rid of delinquent applications. Can you, in like a really quick sentence, kind of explain how that mechanism works, how the shot clock, quote unquote, works?
Jeremy, would you like to take that one? If you're still on the call.
Sure, happy to. Ollie, would you mind repeating the question?
Could you just quickly explain how the shot clock mechanism or the getting rid of the delinquent applications, how that's going to work?
Oh, how it'll work assuming the proposed legislation is passed, or how it works currently?
Correct.
With the proposed legislation, sure. So on one hand, there is an initial 90-day shot clock. As folks know, the application is submitted. The Office of Cannabis works with the applicant through informal zoning, for instance, getting up to Part 1 compliance. How the 45-day shot clock would work in practice is unclear at the moment. However, the concept is, because there are so many applicants that have stalled for a variety of reasons, including folks that aren't actually endeavoring through the process, the OOC will have to think internally about an equitable way to apply that shot clock consistently across its pipeline. So ultimately, it will help to identify the applications that are legitimate, that seek to move forward, and folks having an opportunity within 45 days to either show reasonable steps, good faith efforts to move forward, and if not, it would be removed from the pipeline.
Thank you, Jeremy. I would open up to public comment if everybody's okay with that, because we're running out of time here.
And John, if you could share your screen with the instructions, that would be helpful. Ray, can you pass the ball back to John?
All right, John, all yours. Could you please pull up the dial-in information page? Thank you, John. So members of the general public who want to provide public comment on this particular agenda item can do so by submitting your written comment through the chat function, or you can dial 1-415-655-0001, input the access code, which is 146-708-4595, and press *3 when prompted to do so. You will be unmuted when it's your turn to speak, and each individual will have 3 minutes to provide your comment. Chair Jamalian, I'm going to check the attendee list now. And there is one person waiting to speak, and I'm going to unmute this individual. Hello, caller. You are up next. Please proceed.
Hi, Ray. Okay, my name is Malcolm Joshua White. Sorry if there's a little bit of noise in the back. I got Noah with me. I would like to call and say that I support the 5-year amendment down from 10, but I would like to say that it's going in the right direction. But I strongly believe that we should go further. I believe that equity applicants should have all options open and available to them to increase the chances of achieving generational wealth. I think that's the main point of the equity program. Some people want to stay in the business. Some people might want to get into crypto or real estate or something. And that includes selling their businesses when they want to, and negotiating with their financial partners to get ownership in the bigger business in exchange for, selling my license as an equity applicant when I would like to. For instance, timing is everything in this business. We all know it. I mean, we just discussed timestamp is the reason, but we're even here, that we won there. And the difference between being able to sell right on time or in a 5-year lockup, even if it's only 2 years when when you actually are able to, can mean the ability to sell it at 1.5 or a 5x valuation for your business. Some other callers said earlier that there could be 100 licenses. Now think about the slugfest that's going to be 5 years from now even. So, I'd like to propose, I would like to say that, I would make it even stronger if it was, no years locked up, but 5 is like okay, just starting to be okay. And I would like to say that, keeping equity provisions for the new buyers is very important, especially around shelf space. But that is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more public comments, Ray?
Chair Jamolian, I don't see anyone else waiting to speak, and I'm going to check the chat function now.
Right.
Chair
And
Jamolian, I don't see any written comments submitted in the chat function.
thank you. That concludes this item, unless my fellow committee members have any motions they want to make.
I would definitely like to make a motion that we create a set of recommendations in regards to this this proposal by the mayor as a committee.
Time permitting, if we can sneak, if it's after our next meeting.
Totally.
Okay. Anybody second that motion? Thank you. So John, can we vote on the motion to make recommendations regarding the mayor's ordinances if time permits it, i.e. if we have time in our next meeting to do so? Unless it obviously already went through public hearing and then we know we're too late, so.
Okay, so all those in favor, seat 8, Ali Jamalian.
Aye.
Seat 11, Doug Block.
Aye.
Seat 12, Sean Richard.
Aye.
Seat 13, Nina Parks.
Aye.
Seat 14, Brendan Hallinan.
Aye.
Motion carries with 5 ayes, 3 members absent, 1 seat vacant.
Can I get a clarification? Who seconded that motion? I just didn't see who it was.
Brendan Hallinan.
Great, thank you.
That concludes that point, which brings us to our last point, general public comment. Ray, I'll defer to you for that one.
Sure thing. John, would you mind pull up the dial-in information again while I am doing an answer? Again, members of the general public who want to provide public comment on this agenda item can do so by submitting your written comment through the chat function, or you can dial 145-655-0001. Input the access code, which is 146-708-4595, and press *3 when prompted to do so. You will be unmuted when it's your turn to speak, and each individual will have 3 minutes to provide your general public comment. Chair Jamalian, I'm going to check the attendee list now. I do not see anyone waiting to speak, and I am going to check the chat function now. Seeing none, I think that concludes our public comment section. Chair Jamalian.
Thank you. That adjourns our meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone.
Stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I guess we don't have a co-chair.
Thanks.
And Ray, if you could just move us into the practice session, we can wait for everyone to teeter off.